This first takeoff you see is just to get your attention. The big pile of gear is just a portion of the gear we're going to need for our adventure over the next 5 weeks. But first, we have to stop to get my belly pod at Carbon Concepts. It's just outside of Wasilla at a strip called Anderson Lake. Randy helps us install this belly pod. I've been waiting for it for almost a year, and so I'm anxious to get it on. It weighs 17 pounds and adds quite a bit of useful space, and it actually goes right where I need it, where the center of gravity is the best. We had already filled the fuel tanks and bladder, and we had a range of almost 1,000 miles in no wind conditions. With that in mind, we headed north for a lake called Wild Lake. Beautiful lake I'd been to before, but it had been about 10 years ago, and I wanted to stop there and show John some of the sights. Wild Lake sits on the south side of the Brooks Range, and it's about 50 miles north of Bettles. So we spent the night at Wild Lake and got up the next morning and headed for the north side of the Brooks Range to another lake that I'd been to years before, known as Elusive Lake. And by the time we got to the north side of the Brooks Range into Elusive Lake, the weather was pretty low, and I was very skeptical of spending too much time there and getting weathered in.
Wow. They do look like a tarpon. Sheefish in action. Or even 12-pound trout. You look like you got a big fish.
We ended up where I wanted to be, which was on the Kobuk River, fishing for sheefish. I had heard about fishing for sheefish from a friend and knew that that was one of my key parts of my adventure. So we spent 2 days fishing for these tarpon of the north, and it did not disappoint whatsoever. We landed on many different gravel bars and fished for these monster fish. If you didn't cast and catch something in 5 minutes, it was time to move on. Usually, it didn't take more than a couple casts to get one hooked. The smaller fish were more scrappy than the big fish. The big fish would take your lure and they'd just go to the bottom, and then it was like pulling up a log. We kept one of the sheefish that John caught. It was one of the smaller ones, probably a 8 to 10 pounder. And then we filleted it out and ate on it for 3 days. We'd just keep it cool in the river when we'd land at another spot. I can't say enough about how well it cooked up. You could cook it without anything in the pan. It had enough of its own oils, kind of like halibut in a lot of ways, just more oily.
Wow. Wow. It's like a boat taking off.
Oh, that guy is huge. Oh. See if you can pick him up. Yeah.
The sheefish come into the Kobuk River in mid to late August to spawn. So there's only a short time period that you can actually fish for them.
Oh, it's a great fish. Wow. Why don't you grab him? Let's grab a picture of him. Leave that in for a minute.
The biggest fish I caught, you'll see me trying to land it in the middle of the river while John holds my rod. It took quite a bit of me wrangling this fish to actually get it to a pose where I wasn't looking like I was an idiot. I think John said something like, "Have you never landed a fish before? It looks like you're playing a guitar." He's kind of a comedian. After fishing for sheefish on the Kobuk, we headed north for the Noatak and the Kelly. But along the way, we came upon the Kobuk sand dunes. And so we landed there, got out, took some pictures, marveled at the sand dunes in the middle of nowhere.
Greg and I just landed on the Noatak River. Huge gravel bars. A gorgeous day. And there's all these little fish jumping. I have no idea what they are or what they're going after, but they're kind of everywhere. Look like they're about 4 inches long, 3 inches long, jumping out of the water. We got fall colors, and it is not even September yet.
I don't think there's a place anywhere on this planet that has more varied textures than Alaska. Maybe I'm just not very well traveled, but the range of textures varies so greatly from mountains to tundra to strange rock formations. It's just spectacular. And with the fall colors coming on, it's even more spectacular.
So it's August 28th or 29th. We're on the Noatak. Greg just cast about, 4 seconds ago? And he has on what appears to be a king salmon.
Very bright one.
Yeah. We're fishing a little tiny back eddy on the river. And the fish
I think this might be a doll, is it?
No.
Just so bright.
Yeah. So yeah, the kings that we're pulling in, they're not huge, but they're really feisty. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
He's not sure he's done yet.
I think he's kind of wrapped up.
Yeah, there we go. True to his species. And this is the way we release the fish.
I decided to take off and go fly around a little bit by myself, do some takeoff and landings. I hadn't been in the airplane with it light for almost a week. After spending 2 or 3 days on the Noatak, we needed to get fuel, so we headed for Kotzebue. We got to the north side of the Brooks Range, and I unloaded the airplane and we went scouting for caribou. We found the herd fairly quickly, but decided to keep going.
Really nice. They're great. And his bez are pretty cool too. His front. Yeah, but it's just he's got a real small shovel. But he is gorgeous.
We continued on around the north side of the Brooks Range above the Red Dog Mine and camped out that night. The next morning when we got up, there were caribou around us, and this was one of the caribou that John had his eye on. Caribou don't wait around, they're constantly feeding into the wind, and by the time John made the decision that he was going to take this caribou, it was at 450 yards. One shot, he knocked it down. So now we had caribou meat that we needed to process, so we headed back to Kotzebue.
Keep going then. We're in Kotzebue, Alaska. We run into these guys with Ram Adventure Outfitters or whatever, and they said we could borrow their truck. So this is your turn signal here, I think, and this is your key, and this is like your steering knob, your shifter knob. It's removable, so you can make it ambidextrous, but you start the car like this. You turn it until you hear the fan come on, then you push the little button, and then you get a nice throaty sound there. And then when you're shifting gears, you have to, like when it's in first, you gotta let the clutch out about 10 inches before it engages, or maybe more, and then you're off. And the best part is that you can smell like the end of an exhaust pipe the whole time. So it's really nice. Oh, and like the little star in the windshield, they're going to get around to fixing that, I'm sure. All right, and if your upholstery comes off, you just screw it in with a sheetrock screw or two and a washer. Anyway, over and out.
While we were at Kotzebue processing our meat, we were talking to a person at Ram Aviation, and they were telling us about Serpentine Hot Springs and how it's just totally spectacular, rock formations, etc. So we decided to change our flight plan and head that direction.
So this is the hot springs here at Serpentine Hot Springs. And you can see that's the outdoor natural pool. And then in front of me here is the springs that are set up for like a hot bath. So we're here in the middle of COVID-19. All the precautions are there. But you come in and you have a couple places where you can change into your bathing clothes. And it's cool because they actually use really nice cedar on the walls, on at least some of the walls. And then open the door, and here's the hot springs itself. So the water that's coming in is the white inlet, which is the hot springs water, which is about 170 degrees. And then in addition to that, you can see a little inlet next to it is bringing in cold water, which is about 40 or 38 degrees. So, anyway, nice little place. Have it to ourselves. All right, Greg, so what'd you do here to your plane?
I had to land on top of this ridge so that I could take some pictures of these big rocks. And one of the little rocks flew up and put a nice big hole in my tail feather.
Yikes.
So I'm going to use some of this. It used to be called 100-mile-an-hour tape. Now it's called Gorilla Tape. Gorilla Tape's actually a little better than your typical duct tape. In fact, when I get home to remove it, it'll probably take the paint off.
Wow.
And then I'll patch it so that it's done right. But this will get us for the next couple weeks. We won't even know there's a hole there.
Yeah.
Works really well. It's totally airworthy.
FFA approved.
FAA approved.
FAA approved. Okay, good. All right, cool.
There we go.
Back in business.
And it even matches.
I know, how nice.
This next picture is where I landed and stuck the rock through my tail feathers, unfortunately.
So I just found this. It's in the middle of the tundra. This is a bullet. They're edible. You basically peel this soft, spongy layer back, like so, to clean it. And then you can slice it up and cook it with butter. And you want to find them where there's not a bunch of worms in the stem. And usually if there's no worms in the stem, they're good to eat. So you get rid of all this stuff. And now it's ready to slice up and eat.
After Serpentine, we headed for Galena, and this was a gravel bar we happened to land on for lunch. The only reason we were going to Galena was for fuel. Unfortunately, they're not very fuel friendly there, and we ended up spending probably close to 24 hours just to get fuel.
Hey brothers, just wanted to say, you probably could help me out with this, but I'm thinking I'm on a salmon river when you can't find a place to wade because of all the doggone carnage from all of the salmon bodies, which are everywhere, littered along the shore by the thousands. Even walking on the rocks, there's all dried up pink salmon and looks like sockeye salmon everywhere. There's still a few, oh, and there's also some chum salmon as well in that mix. So look, just like salmon carnage everywhere. Of course there's bear tracks everywhere too.
These are just a few of some random pictures John shot from the air as we flew towards Galena. We ended up spending a night on a sandbar outside of Galena in hopes that we could get fuel first thing in the morning, which did not happen. We had grayling that night for dinner though, and it was good. John is a petroleum geologist and knows a lot about rocks. Every gravel bar we went to, we searched for pretty rocks, and every once in a while we'd find one shaped like a heart, and John would text it to his wife. This is a C-46, a fairly common freight hauler in Alaska. I called it a DC-3, and the pilot got pretty annoyed with me. I tried to buy some fuel, some avgas from him because I was having problems getting it from Galena, and he said no. From there, we headed back to Palmer to basically rearrange our gear. We needed to get rid of the fishing gear and get the moose hunting gear. And so once we reprovisioned, gassed up, we headed for Kirk Ellis's Devil's Mountain Lodge. I've known Kirk for a number of years, and he's been kind enough to let us use his place as a staging ground, sell us fuel, and put us up for the night and feed us along the way. But we spend most of our time out in the bush. I can't say enough about the Ellises. They treat me like family. We are now headed out to our moose hunting grounds. This little black-footed weasel was next to a cabin that's close by the airstrip that I land. The airstrip's about 400 feet long, and it's surrounded by willows, as you can see in this video. The willows had grown up pretty high. I went through and cut down a bunch of them and kind of cleared a turnaround at the end. And here I am spinning around. I think we spent a couple days in this location scouting before the season. What we really wanted to do was to get up another drainage away from this particular drainage, and that's where we ended up hunting moose from. As you can see, the weather turned pretty quickly, and we had snow and much cooler weather, but that was good for the moose anyway. Each morning, we would make the climb, probably 1,000 feet from this lower gravel bar to this upper bench, and we'd set up John's 60-power Swarovski spotting scope, look for moose, and then hope that we'd find a big one that we could go after during the day. Most mornings we did see something worthy, and we would set up a game plan. If we didn't happen to capitalize on that game plan, we would then hike up to the bench, spot for our evening hunt. Moose are amazing animals. They can move through the thickest brush with almost no noise, and you would think with those big pieces of plywood on their head they wouldn't disappear so easily. But a lot of times we would spot a moose, keep our eye on it, and still not be able to see it come back out of the brush. Being patient and having the moose come more into rut really helps. Look at this. True to the Alaskan reputation, when it wasn't windy, the mosquitoes were out and bothersome. This was a small bull we stumbled upon midday. I made the mistake of cow calling, and he came in pretty darn close. This next bull is a bull that we spotted on opening day, but we just decided that it was too soon to shoot.
We saw him out there. Ooh, man, he looks good. Dude, what are we doing passing on this moose?
It is a workout walking through this tundra stuff. Over the course of moose season, I lost 6 pounds. In this next segment, John and I are walking along, and I'm kind of being silly, and all of a sudden, a big bull stands up.
On our quest for big moose, we're covering some new ground for the 3rd or 4th time. Really, it's just the same ground. But we're going after 2 monsters. From a place that my moose came to rest, he couldn't have come to rest in a more picturesque place on Earth.
But you can't say anything else. We'll get him out of here.
He's looking upriver at this cascading waterfall.
This is last sight.
Left this earth happy, and I'm gonna eat every bite of him.
So Greg and I were at the top of this mountain right there. I don't know if you can see. This is vertical. I mean, this is horizontal. This is like vertical, all covered with alders. No paths, no nothing. And Greg shot a moose over on this side. So you can see like that's also near vertical. In fact, it's... Oh, and then it's a golden eagle up there who's coming to see if we survived, which is hard to believe. And anyway, so Greg managed to shoot this monster moose. And like the worst place on the planet, I might add, even though it's like amazing, awesome moose. But he landed in this hole, which is a good thing, because if he didn't, he would have dropped down into that hole, which would have been a bad hole. Let's put it straight down to the bad hole place. But smoking big moose. Look at it, he's got four in the front there, 2 on this side, but makes up for big palms and a happy grinning dude.
That big monster bull that stood up, I shot it. And here it is in my airplane. I went and picked up AJ from Devil's Mountain Lodge to help us pack out the moose. He's this young 22, 23-year-old bull rider from Colorado, and he would stick 150 pounds on his back and pack it like it was nothing. This is the same view from outside my airplane. John's filming me coming in for a load. John ended up spending the night out there by himself. By the time I got AJ out of there with a load of meat, it was too dark for me to come back in. I told John I wasn't going to be back, and he said it was okay. But he didn't sleep well that night with moose meat all around him. This was a fairly short spot. It had a fairly decent approach either direction, so if the wind was blowing, I could land it upriver or downriver. This is the bull that John shot just a few days after I shot mine. There were actually a few bulls in this group. There was actually a bigger bull that we did not see until after John shot his bull, and you'll hear his conversation and my conversation after that fact. Not to be lost on either one of us, this same thing happened 6 years ago when we were hunting moose together for the first time. He shot a bull, and a big bull walked out right after the fact.
I'm videoing.
The one that we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
That's alive.
The one that's alive, not the one that I killed.
I know it's good. I can see it in my binoculars.
You gotta be kidding me. Oh my gosh, Greg. What have we done?
I hope it's legal. It looked like it had points to me.
Oh, it did have points. I don't know. We'll find out. Look at this dang bull. Wow.
This young man that Kirk has working for him as an assistant guide has also got his pilot's license. He just bought this Super Cub that's white with blue that you'll see at the beginning of the segment on the moose. And he's got about 20 hours in it. Kirk has taken him under his wing and is teaching him how to be a bush pilot, along with being a guide. And he plays a pretty mean guitar. Many thanks to AJ, and my back thanks you also. We spent the last few days scouting for moose for our next hunt. We also landed next to the Nebezna Glacier, did a little sightseeing. I had landed in this same spot with my wife probably at least 6 or 7 years prior to this, and it's amazing how much the glacier had changed in that amount of time. It's receded back quite significantly. We also spent pretty much the full day at the Nebezna mine, exploring the gold mine that was once in production. John and I had a fair amount of work to do before we could pack up and leave. We had 2 moose to butcher, package and wrap, and so that took a full day of just doing that. We had antlers to cut off of the skulls and kind of clean up so they wouldn't be stinky.
This is a vandal who is 57 years old.
Vandal? Is this illegal?
No, this is a ruffian. This is a redneck. This is someone who's going to hurt his back. Now that was good.
It was now time to pack up and head for Anchorage. It wasn't going to be easy because I had 2 moose and all of our gear. It was going to take multiple trips, and the weather was going to be a factor on each trip. A few times I had to land along the way just to avoid weather, wait it out, and then start back up again. I ended up making those trips over a 2-day period and finally got everything back into Palmer, or into Anchorage actually. Palmer was our kind of satellite base, and Anchorage was where we were flying out of, so everything had to get to Merrill Field eventually. Well, the adventure's over. If you liked this one, hit subscribe.